Hi everyone, this is Michael with CDSoundMaster. CDS is classically defined sound. And this video is going to set up what the next several videos are going to revolve around. And still dealing with tape and tape machines before we go into some of the other types of plugins that we're working with. I want to define the idea of how I like to use tape as an intentional sound in the recording process, and going back from that main point to a little bit of the history from analog to digital and how we use things now versus then. And then in the following videos, I'm going to deal with specifically the idea of setting levels for monitoring versus getting the best sound. And then we're going to look at the actual use of some very moderate settings in Tape Booster Plus and just setting up that sound. So as we look at how it affects the signal and learning what does it mean to let your ears help you to tune your sound, it will start to make more and more sense about how we do gain staging and setting the signal chain. And these are things that go all the way back to, for me, the journey in having the discussions with people in making VSTs and designing plugins around real analog processes. The realization of that really went from 2003 to 2005 for the research, and 2005 to 2007 getting the Retro Analog Studio Suite going, where the goal was to create entire signal chains in a single program, so that, even 10, 15 different processes were all kind of working under the hood in a very simplified manner. And Nebula provided the platform to allow, that proof of concept to take place. So starting at the start with analog, the whole idea of really great sounding analog was always to get things as clean and transparent as possible. And the rule of thumb used to be that you pay more to hear less, meaning that really low-end mixers and like all-in-one mixers, live audio mixers, things that we all tried to use for studio gear when we were saving up our funds for good stuff. It was really not until Alesis and Mackie that there is a truly affordable choice in a brand new mixer, unless you're looking for a really great used deal on something. And the really cheap mixers that would get you great sound, but certainly not perfectly transparent sound, were things like Soundcraft. This is just going off the top of my head. I don't even remember some of the things. Hill, I believe, made some. Ramsey made some really great boards, but you could be talking $5,000, $8,000, $20,000 for the, in quotes, cheap boards. And we thought of basically Neve and SSL were the two competing at the top. And yes, they both have very unique sounds. We've actually become very familiar with the sound of those consoles, but they are extremely transparent compared to the lower stuff, which had a very limited range that you could capture sound. And there was a dullness or a veil over the sound if you had anything that was less than $1,000 per channel. So I experienced in the analog world that transfer of time to what kind of things were available as a single channel. And it really was through the 90s into the first decade of the 2000s that we were even looking at, an affordable audio interface to capture the sound, and one or two channels of something very expensive that was broken down to where we could afford it. And as you go along, you save your money and you get better things. And China, clones really good things, and it gets cheaper and cheaper. And the audio interface area gets more and more competitive. You have a lot better options. So the idea of transparency in analog was a very expensive thing. If you wanted to have a 60, 70 decibel audio range of super clean sound, where you're not dealing with distortion or noise, and it sounded like the microphone was fully present, that there was nothing that was blocking the quality of the sound from getting through, you had to pay top dollar. $3 or $4 grand per channel was not unusual. And so, an 8-channel mixer was, not even seen as a studio level thing, but it still, cost more than a car. So looking at the tape machines, we had on the inexpensive range, we had Tascam and Fostex making some decent sounding stuff. And they really relied on whatever type of DBX audio noise removal or compression would help to reduce the noise floor. And you would record a fairly hot signal, first of all, because you wanted to capture as much of the tape to help avoid whatever noise floor was there if you wanted to try to avoid using any Dolby on the audio. But it was also kind of a hedge against loss, meaning that if you recorded really close to zero, maybe +2 at max, you had a really pristine audio, but as you have to play back the mix over and over and over, this was before we had, digitization directly from our first pass. The tape is getting worn out. So you wanted to have, basically a fairly hot signal that warmed things up, but also captured a fairly loud volume of your high frequencies without distorting them and without getting sibilance and other problems that could come. So anyway, the idea was between the console and the tape machine, you weren't really trying to overload anything in order to sweeten or over enhance the sound so much as you were trying to get things as transparent as possible. The fact of the matter is that there was no parallel experience to not using that much analog in the sound process. So you didn't have a tape machine versus non-tape machine until you had all MIDI studios sending the sound directly from their console into a DAT machine for digital, which that was going analog out into analog in, and then a converter. So you had, 20 other things that were dealing with what the quality of the sound was going to be. So transparency even then wasn't really giving us what we need, but you would hear the difference between an $80,000 tape machine and a $900 tape machine. And there were lots of different things in between. Once again, buying a used deck had a lot to do with how well it had been maintained and demagnetized, or whether you're dealing with relapped or brand new heads and all that kind of stuff. So what we discovered when we got into pure digital, first of all, the first audio interfaces and the first converters left a lot to be desired. And it took probably 5 years before you could really record computer audio in a machine that was, better than CD quality, if we can use those terms. So within that time where digital audio was just starting to be friendly, really, in my opinion, not until the late 90s, do we really have good audio options that could handle the capacity, the hard drives, the good CD burners, and all the different things that came with that. At that time, and by the way, ADAT was kind of that entry-level thing that brought a lot of the world into digital, but it really wasn't the solution. We were still dealing with, just barely better than prosumer level stuff. There were some things out there that I actually enjoyed the sound with intentionally for tinkering with, and I wish I could remember was it Vestax or something that had a really cool sound to it. The digital mixer 8 tracks. Anyway, the point being that we didn't really know what the sound of the analog world without tape actually sounded like until we didn't need it. And once we didn't need it, a lot of people realized that, first of all, there's a difference between transparent and sterile. And digital some people would say digital sounds cold. Other people might say that I would say that it sounded sterile, meaning I'm now really just dealing with the audio. There's nothing helping me or enhancing the sound that I'm getting. I'm on my own with this. It just sounds like what I recorded in. And if my preamp was kind of soggy or dull, or the warm effect that it had was lacking that dimensionality the dimensions that I was hoping for, then I heard it right there. There's nothing helping. And tape had a lot to do with that help that we were getting. It just did. So tape, we talk about things that tend to fatten up the sound, things that some people have tried to define it as an instant compression. And what I found from the years of research that I did that go into this, when I initially started talking about doing R2R and then Tape Booster Plus and all this stuff, I mentioned how it really was, more than 5 years worth of research. That is not an exaggeration. From just visual analysis is just one element of it, but really studying the same material looped, different intentionally chosen things from jazz to hip hop to whatever, heavy guitars, light guitars, testing lots of different machines to look for commonality and to look for what is it doing to the transient peaks and to the more sustained averaged levels to things, and how do they respond to different volumes. Does some frequency impact other aspects less than other frequencies? All these different things that go into it. And the instant compression was almost entirely composed of the saturation effect or the harmonic distortion. So the idea of Tape Booster Plus was to focus in specifically on that aspect of it. And then everything in R2R and the Apex tape collection can all come together because you're getting the spectral signature and the harmonic signature of those machines, but not as much control over driving them heavy. Really hearing that compressing effect that comes from deep saturation. I've heard some really great tape saturators, a lot of really cool plugins, and some of the manufacturers have gotten better and better over the years. But really, from the beginning of the new millennium, there really was not VST that sounded like tape, that truly operated like tape. And everything is a simplification in one way or the other. Even the most advanced machines today, most advanced plugins today are emulating something that is more complex than themselves. The more algorithmic process that's happening, the less realism. But when you combine layers of processes, you get something exceptional and very advanced. So the basis of this introductory information on using tape as a musical instrument, the idea occurred to me to put it this way. There are bands from the 60s and 70s and even sometime in the 80s where the studio experience became so central to the sound of the band that I always thought of it as, because I was experimenting with the same things in the late 80s, early 90s, learning how to do this from a recording production facility, that the studio was really a part of the sound. The construction of the sound process, from choosing the mics, the distance, the gain levels, choosing which consoles to use for different things. And this whole combination was such an art form. It really is like you're playing an instrument. So if you think of, I would use the example of a guitarist because I think it deals with so much of the same structure of things. You have a guitarist choosing their guitar and choosing the amp that they're going to plug the guitar into. Just with that process, let's say that you are a guitarist looking for a really good, pure, clean tone. And if you were trying to do literally nothing but hear the sound of you playing the guitar, then you could just plug into a channel of a console and not use an amp. And most people would tell you that they are not pleased with the results when they do that. So when we think of clean tones, we really are thinking of what is the amp offering. And it's not just the sound coming out of the speaker, because once again, studio monitors can do that rather well. The amp, probably most likely in a tube process, has an input stage and an output stage, basically, rectifiers, or, whether it's a tube setup, or sometimes tube will be a dual stage and then you'll have a solid state output. It just depends. But the output is really, the goal is to amplify, but it also interacts with the input stage, that gain stage. And if you think of turning up, kind of heating up the tubes until you get a little bit of saturation where the tone still sounds very, very clean, but it sounds fat and sweetened, and you feel like you're playing the guitar better because you're hearing all of the nuance. You're hearing all of the detail. And it's not just because something is pumped up. And if you really, went heavy on the guitar, you would start to hear a little bit of crunch or drive. You could think of it as overdriven, or you could think of it as distorted. But, so you're using the amp even at the cleaner tones, at the cleaner stages, to help enhance the effect of your playing. So if you think of, okay, you really are hearing the sound of the guitar, you're hearing the sound of the pick or your finger picking. If you compared that to just plugging in a really great sounding console and the sound of just the pickups and the guitar and the strings, how much of an instrument that amp truly is. It's the combination of you, the musician, the guitar, your playing style, and the amplifier itself that are providing the whole of the sound. So imagine if you were required to take the amp out of that picture. That to me is what you're doing when you remove the tape machine from the recording process. It is an option, but then if you have that completely absent from your digital audio, you're going to be looking to all these other tools to kind of make up the difference from something that was really enhancing things for us. It was doing clean and transparent in such a musical way that when it's gone, we absolutely notice the absence of it. So that is the idea that I want to get across and why we use things like R2R, TV Plus, and Apex Tape Collection. So I hope that helps. The idea of using the studio as a musical instrument is going to be a reoccurring theme, because that to me is the artistry of the sound that I work as a guy that embraces analog and digital, and find it so wonderful to be able to digitize everything in this world now, but having those tools that I don't miss the things that used to really help a mix, help bring it together. The truth of the matter is a great sounding console at the top of that transparency line. It's very dimensional, it's very clear and open, but it's absolutely bringing something to the table that's additive. Tape machine, I would say even 10% more than even the best console. The tape machine is absolutely doing something to the signal that helps sweeten, enhance, grow, kind of puff things up and make them a pillowy, larger than life version of what it is we're trying to do. So even if you're talking about live performances, even if you're talking about, front of house and all these different things, we've always noticed over the years that there was a difference between not just the performance live and studio. Sometimes you get better actual playing when you have the band live than when they're breaking it down in the studio and getting very precise about the individual instruments. But really through, the 70s and 80s, most of the live stuff was being tracked to tape too. So there's still, classic music, classic rock, classic blues, jazz, all these different things. There was a soul and a feeling and an element that the second that those same artists all were experimenting with all digital for the first time, they all chose to go back to 2-inch 24-track studios and have everything mastered to a 1/4-inch or half track, or 1/4-inch or half-inch 2-track masters. It's just, that's the results of things. So I think that they noticed what I've noticed, which is having the option to have realistic tape working in the process, even in digital, is still one of those great yet elusive things that we benefit from. So what I'm going into from here, dealing with dynamic range and the actual audio examples of all this stuff, what you're going to hear is what I'm trying to convey with the concept, which is, once you have heard what that tape effect is and heard a range of what that can do with the same music options, then when you go for, if you're looking for absolutely clean, clear audio, when you're going for a very light version of that using very little of the tape effect, you will be aware of what it is that you're using. It may be very hard to hear it because you're trying for subtle. You might not be trying to make even, a half a decibel of a difference, wanting to keep things pristine. But what you're adding adds a great deal over the mix. But I'm going to give examples that are more heavy-handed so that you can truly hear the tape effect. And then once you're very aware of that, it's easier for you to translate that into your mixes using lighter, moderate to light versions of that same harmonic distortion, that saturation effect. So I hope that idea is helpful to you, thinking of the art of creating music and music production, not just the science of it, so that you, the artist, the musician, the producer, the composer, can be inspired to work with your craft with love and care and artistry. So I hope that's an inspiring idea for you. And next comes the audio examples. So thank you so much for listening and watching. God bless you, and bye for now.